Hey, did you know that 95% of people whose faces are on banknotes are men? And this is the UK, not even the worst offender. Over the centuries, countless pioneering women have been erased from history books. But if we don't tell their stories now, then who will? From an unassuming botanist to a warrior queen, here's one woman from each decade who broke barriers and changed the world between them. In the year 1740, a baby girl was born into poverty in France. As a child, she grew up dirt poor, hungry, and illiterate. Her father, a shoemaker, worked long hours, often leaving her and her siblings unattended. So it's no surprise that when she was only 7, little Jeanne ran away from home and never looked back. She took odd jobs wherever she could get them, which allowed her to travel all across Europe and learn many languages. By age 17, she was working as a maid in Paris and had mastered several skills, including sewing, cooking, and cleaning. But Jeanne needed more than just a good work ethic. She craved adventure. Soon she found herself sneaking into taverns, drinking, smoking, and dressing as a man. At one point, she even enlisted in the Navy, serving as an ordinary sailor on a ship bound for Canada. But she didn't last long. This wasn't due to any lack of bravery, but because she missed her mother terribly and had to return home. However, there was no going back. She would never be satisfied living a simple life again. When Jeanne was 26, she met the love of her life, Louis Antoine de Bougainville, a naval officer who was planning to circumnavigate the world. He asked her to become his mistress and promised her a noble title and position aboard the ship. Although she was pregnant, she accepted and soon gave birth to their son. On November 1766, the entire crew set sail from France. For 2 years, Jeanne lived in the relative luxury of the captain's cabin with her lover and son. Then, tragedy struck. Her son died of scurvy, and her heart broke. Unable to bear the pain any longer, she revealed her true identity to the crew. Everyone was shocked. After all, she had successfully pulled off the disguise for over 2 years. Captain Bougainville immediately offered her his condolences and gave her the rank of servant to the ship's officers, so that she could still travel with honor. When they arrived back in France in 1769, newspapers reported that they had discovered the first woman to ever circumnavigate the globe. But the truth was far different. They had no idea that Jeanne had been traveling in disguise the whole time. In fact, they wouldn't find out until after both she and her lover died. Now known as Jeanne Baret, she was finally given credit for her amazing journey. But only after historians discovered her secret, because to protect her reputation and that of the French Navy, everyone agreed to keep her secret buried forever. When Lewis and Clark set out on their famous expedition, the Corps of Discovery, they had no idea that they were about to make history. You see, they weren't the first Europeans to discover the Pacific Northwest. That honor belonged to an unassuming Spanish explorer named Francisco Garces, who traversed the region in 1776. But he had done so alone and without making contact with any Native American tribes. This time, however, things would be different. The United States government wanted to establish diplomatic relations with the tribes west of the Rocky Mountains. And so they tasked Lewis and Clark with the mission of reaching the Pacific Ocean and finding a route to the nearest jail. To do this, they would need a guide familiar with the land and its people. Enter Sacagawea, an 18-year-old Shoshone woman, who had recently been captured by the British. With her knowledge of the area and ability to communicate with the natives, Sacagawea proved indispensable to the team. Unfortunately, she had a much more difficult role to play as well. Because while the Americans believed that the natives would view them as friends, the reality was quite different. Many tribes considered Lewis and Clark enemies. This meant that the safety of the entire group depended on Sacagawea's ability to remain calm and beautiful under pressure. As a result, she became something of a pawn in the political game being played by the Americans and the British. When tensions flared between the two sides, it was Sacagawea who stepped in to calm things down. In one instance, she saved the life of a tribal chief by preventing a fight from breaking out. Even when the group was starving, she remained positive and encouraged them to keep moving forward. Eventually, they reached the Pacific Ocean and returned home safely. But despite her heroism, Sacagawea's contributions were largely forgotten until the 20th century. Today, however, she is remembered as a symbol of strength and resilience. In 1831, young woman from England named Isabella Bird decided that she did and want to live a normal life. Instead, she wanted to see the world. So with only 50 pounds in her pocket, she boarded a ship to North America and began exploring. Over the next 30 years, she would travel to every continent on Earth except Antarctica and document her experiences in great detail. She marveled at the natural beauty of the American West and spent months exploring Yellowstone National Park. When she ventured through Asia, she was captivated by the rich cultures and traditions she encountered. Although she wasn't the first European to visit these places, she was the first woman to do so alone without any male companions. Throughout her travels, she kept detailed journals and took thousands of photographs. Upon her return to England, she published these accounts, which became bestsellers. She was celebrated as a pioneer for showing other Victorian ladies that they too could see the world on their own terms. Fortunately, her legacy has been somewhat tarnished by the fact that she also held some rather controversial views. For example, she believed that Western expansion was justified because white people were superior to other races. Nevertheless, there is no denying that Isabella Bird was a trailblazer who paved the way for generations of female explorers. Annie Smith Peck was a scholar and an adventurer who refused to let anything stand in the way of her goals. Despite suffering from chronic illness throughout her life, she managed to scale 3 of the world's tallest mountains, completing what is now known as the 7 Summits. She loved nothing more than tackling challenging hikes and conquering them with ease. One day, she set out to climb Mount Huascaran in Peru, but disaster struck when she slipped and fell 2,000 feet to her death. In 1862, Mary Kingsley was born in England to a wealthy family. From an early age, she was curious about the world around her and dreamed of exploring Africa. When she was 20, her brother tragically died while working in Sierra Leone, and she vowed to finish his work. She studied the local languages and customs and learned how to shoot a rifle. She spent years traveling the continent and became one of the first Europeans to study African cultures. She was also one of the first to venture into the remote jungle markets of Nigeria. During her travels, she faced many dangers, including malaria and poisonous snakes. But nothing could compare to the terror she experienced when she encountered a crocodile attack.
Luckily,
she escaped unscathed and continued her explorations.
She was determined to prove
that African women were not as uncivilized as some believed. In fact, she wrote that they were often better educated and more cultured than their European counterparts. Sadly, Mary Kingsley never got to see her book published during her lifetime, as she died of yellow fever shortly after returning to England. However, her legacy lives on through the many explorers she inspired. In 1893, Freya Stark was born in England to an affluent family. From an early age, she was fascinated by ancient civilizations and dreamed of exploring the Middle East. In 1917, she joined the British Committee of the Red Cross and worked as a relief organizer in Kurdistan. There she witnessed firsthand the devastating effects of war and poverty. Determined to help those less fortunate, she spent years traveling the region and mapping uncharted territories. She braved treacherous terrain and scorching temperatures, all while wearing nothing but a light cotton dress. Along the way, she uncovered lost cities and artifacts that shed light on the history of human civilization. Although she was initially criticized for her unconventional methods, she eventually became one of the most respected archaeologists of her time. Freya Stark was a true trailblazer who defied the expectations of her society and made groundbreaking discoveries in the process. So, who are some of the women explorers who've inspired us? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this one. Thanks for watching.